The people of K-pop and tchotchke, plastic surgery and total closeness are a simultaneous example and a nightmare of the capitalist world. Today, we have Korea as a guest, a country located in one of the most unique positions in the world. Being divided into two parts, the population of which is afraid of each other, Korea seems to be a familiar, but at the same time incredibly strange state. Or states, whichever is more convenient. What brought it to life? Our regular viewers know that this story is actually fresh and had no preconditions. To make sure of this, let's take a closer look at a more ancient story of one and indivisible Korea and its culture before the malignant division. Why were all the countries of the East Asian region closed and isolated? Where did the Koreans come from, and what do military coups have to do with it? All these questions we will discuss with you in the next couple of minutes. As is customary for many peoples, the Koreans tried to make their history much more ancient. According to the medieval Korean book Samguk-yusa, it is known about the formation of the ancient Korean kingdom in 2333 BC by Prince Tangun Wang, who descended from the sky as the son of the goddess Bear. We will not believe this without evidence, of course, but in fact, it is really more difficult to determine the origin of the Koreans than it seems. The fact is that according to the preserved Korean, Chinese and Japanese texts of the period of the fragmentation of Korea, which we will talk about a little later, historians and linguists make a unanimous conclusion that all the Korean kingdoms spoke different languages. Instead of which, only 1,000 years later, a familiar Korean language will come to us. And the problem is this. Modern researchers have no idea which of these languages is the ancestor of the Korean language and whether these languages are related to each other. The modern Korean language is considered isolated, that is, it has no confirmed relatives, while the languages of that period seem to be related to Japanese, Manchurian, Chinese, and maybe even Mongolian, or in general, all at the same time. There are many hypotheses, from modest to the most exotic, but so far none of them has found more or less stable support in the scientific community, and therefore the Korean people in terms of origin remain no less mysterious than the neighbouring Japanese. On this note, let's go back to the well-known facts. The oldest remains of human activity on the Korean peninsula date back to the first millennium BC. At that time, the Chinese civilization was already actively growing and developing. In fact, the first Chinese mentions of the Koreans are recorded in the Guanzi Chronicle from about the 7th century BC. At that time, of course, there was no single kingdom yet. It is known for sure about a number of independent cities-fortresses that led trade, military, and other equipment to each other. By the 4th century, some of the cities were united into a more or less stable kingdom, the ancient Choson or Kochoson. It is considered the oldest and truly famous state of the Koreans, from which they tell their story. Then, there was already one of the oldest Korean capitals, Pyongyang, known then as Hwanggamseon. It is about Gochoseon that the legend of the founding of the Kingdom of the Gods is about. From this character, the Koreans will tell their native language and language. But the culture, according to the legend, was brought to them by the Chinese prince of the Shan Sixi dynasty, known in Korea as Gija. According to the legend, Gija came to Gochoseon in the 12th century BC and founded the same dynasty which has existed for thousands of years up to its overthrow in 194 BC by another Chinese descendant from the Yan Wiman dynasty. Here, we finally talk not about legends. This character is recorded in history, and we are confident about him. Wiman also founded his dynasty, which will exist until 108 BC. Then, Kochoson became the province of the Han Empire. However, Kochoson was not the only Korean state. In the north, on the territory of modern Manchuria, the state of Puyo was formed, and in the south of the peninsula from the Chinese tribal union, the Samhan Confederation was formed. Also, there was a proto-kingdom of Ae, which will later fall into a few smaller ones. After the fall of Joseon, several more large and not very large kingdoms and alliances will be formed on its territory, in which the devil himself will break his leg. It was in this period that we talked when we were talking about languages. We will not go into all of them now. First of all, there are a lot of them, and for this you will need a separate video if you ask a lot in the comments. Well, secondly, they do not play a special role in history. For us, it is more important that in the end, they will be united into a single Korean kingdom. However, this unification will be preceded by another period of the three kingdoms. From the kingdom of Puyo, somewhere by the beginning of our era, the kingdom of Koguryo and Paekche is formed. The first is a militarized northern kingdom with a capital in Pyongyang, which conquered the kingdom of Iya and a number of others. And the second is a trading naval power with a capital in Seoul. Some geniuses believe that this is already a prelude to the modern division of Korea, but this version has nothing to do with reality. Koguryo Paekche absorbed the culture of China and actively traded with Japan. It was through Paekche, as it is believed, that the Chinese hieroglyphs, Buddhism and Paekche is also sometimes called Phoenix and East Asia. In the south of the peninsula from the Kingdom of Qin, meanwhile, two more states were formed, Silla and Kaya. They don't talk much about the last one because it was a weakly developed tribal union, quickly absorbed by the Silla. The Silla was a military union with the Tan Empire in the 7th century, with the help of which Paekche first conquered, and then Koguryo, taking advantage of the local military coup, thereby uniting Korea. But the end of this epic is still far away. First of all, China still claimed the whole of Korea, with which Silla successfully coped. Secondly, these three kingdoms, although they were like relatives, but culturally differed greatly. Silla held the unity of states well until the 9th century, but the political crisis forced the descendants of the conquered Koguryo and Paekche to rebel. This is how the period of the late three kingdoms of the 10th century began. In 918, General Koguryo Wangon became the king and founded his dynasty. By 936, Koguryo took over the entire Korean peninsula, as well as the kingdom of Bahai in the north, the successor of the former Goguryeo. Goguryeo began to be named simply Koryo, from which the word Korea itself comes from, although another name is used in Korea itself. The kingdom of Koryo finally became the United Korea. At the same time, the Koguryo language dominated the country initially, but then was replaced by the Silla language, Korean, which eventually became the closest ancestor of the modern Korean language. In the era of the United Korea, the final formation of the Korean nation took place. In addition to the emergence of a single common language, a common national myth was also established. In the Koryo era, the very chronicles of Samguk Yusa were written, which speak of the divine origin of ancient Korea. During the reign of Koryo, Buddhism flourished. After the war with China in the 11th century, the parties switched to diplomacy and the period of peace began. Korea actively traded with all the peoples of Asia and even with Muslims who had arrived in the region. In Korea, the flourishing of culture began, and it was then that the famous Korean ceramics appeared. Also, in Korea, there were metal clichés for book printing. In the 12th century, the period of palace and then military coups began. There were so many of them that even Latin America would envy. As a result, the military dictatorship of the Choi clan was established in Korea, and the role of the emperor became only decorative. In 1231, the Mongols invaded Korea, eventually establishing their ego here on their own. At least, this gave the Koreans a common enemy and a reason to unite. In 1368, the Mongolian dynasty of Yuan was finally abandoned in China. While the Ming and the remnants of Yuan quarreled with each other and fought for influence in Korea, General Li Songhai carried out another military coup. And in 1392, he founded a new dynasty named after the ancient Korean kingdom Joseon. This kingdom has been stable until today, At first, a considerable boost to development gave the strengthening of Confucianism instead of Buddhism. Officials began to be elected by submitting special exams and not by inheritance, which made the state apparatus much more effective, as well as popularized education in Korea. For the same purposes, in the Kingdom of Joseon, a modern Korean alphabet appears, Hangul, which gave the Korean language a phonetic record. Joseon, in general, in the 15th-16th centuries, experiences the development of culture and science. Astronomy is developing, and with it all kinds of clocks and calendars. In 1592, the army of Toyotomi Hideyoshi invaded Korea, uniting Japan. Korean commander Lee Sun-sin repelled the invasion with the help of the Korean know-how of the Kabukson ships and turtles. In the 17th century, Korea continues to develop, but falls into a vassal dependence on the Manchurian 19th century. This dependence became more of a formality. Nevertheless, it partly influenced the further closeness and lag of Korea. The conservative lobby in the Korean government also played a role in this. There were also enough innovators there, but in many ways, even they were not ready for the novelties brought from the West. At the same time, Christianity appeared in Korea, which was popular at first, but soon large-scale persecutions 19th century. Because of all this, by the second half of the 19th century, Korea lagged behind even China, not to mention Japan or Europe. There were attempts to reform the Japanese model within it, but again, popularity was not sought. In the 1890s, there was the Japanese-Chinese War, which transferred Korea to the Japanese sphere of influence. Already in 1910, Japan finally annexes Korea, and, like in other of its colonies, will begin to implant their culture there, up to the language and names. This period will end only with the capitulation of Japan in 1945, which was followed by a vicious division and the Korean War. We already have videos on the channel about these events, as well as the future fate of the DPRK. If you want a separate video about the DPRK, click here. About South Korea, bomb it in the comments. Here, in short, we will say about her that she managed to live in poverty in an authoritarian government with the support of the United States, then a military coup and the so-called dictatorship of Panchong Hai, who prepared the ground for the further economic miracle on the Han River. After his rule in Korea, the democratic regime stabilizes, while in the north, a totalitarian monarchy is established. The division of Korea 70 years ago did not have any historical preconditions. However, the two modern Koreas already have so many differences, even at the level of the same language, that it is more and more difficult to talk about their unification. Nevertheless, the two Koreas have had a common history for more than 2,000 years, and we hope that these 70 years will not outweigh it. See you soon, friends!